but I think in many ways, just to give you some context here, I was opted into this halfway through, so I'm not very well prepared, and what I'm going to try to do is just capture the key points of our discussion, and all the people who are involved in our can please sort of chip in and say what they think. Otherwise you're going to have me ad-libbing, which would be a dangerous thing. So, in terms of guidelines, the first thing we thought about is that, which fits with something we mentioned this morning, that it's really quite important, if we think about the focus on open educational practices, to maybe think of the two extremes of those practices. At one end we can have personally motivated informal learning activities, which are very different than when institutions want to adopt and incorporate open educational resources into their teaching and learning. And so, so it's very difficult to come up with a set of guidelines, for example, which cover both of those extremes. And I suppose the way our conversation went was really not really about how we specify guidelines, but really what's important in terms of getting things adopted. So maybe guidelines is too rigid an idea. So what we thought about was that fundamentally we need to link sort of the open educational resources to the sort of meaningful practices that people will actually perform with those resources. So we thought that rather than having guidelines, an alternative might be to have things like sort of human stories surrounding the adoption and use of resources, and also linking the resources to practices that might be meaningful to someone who wants to adopt them. So, for example, case studies and stories of adoption, and also these stories of successful OEPs don't have to be beautiful, brilliant stories, but one stories where things work and where things don't work. So the idea is that to get these resources used, we need them to link to practices that are tangible to people who want to come in and use them. And I like one sort of one nice phrase that I forget who came up with it, is making the talk visible. So rather than just saying here's your resource and here's your guidelines, how can we expose the sort of dialogue that go on in order to get these resources successfully used? And could, instead of thinking about guidelines, should we be thinking of linking resources to meaningful practices? So it's not about a set of guidelines, but maybe we link it to, there's links to the community. So for example, what you might want to do if you want to adopt a resource is speak to somebody who's used it before. And form relationship with people who've used resources to solve similar problems. So we came up with this sort of idea that, and to be aware of the issues. So it's not really about guidelines, but being aware of things like the inherent flexibility that's going to be required to adopt open educational resources. That often sort of the way the resources are presented and the practices are presented need to somehow reflect the reality that these things aren't always going to come perfectly fit for purpose. They're going to need some thought and adaptation. And notions like trust again, we try to put some flesh on this idea of trust. What does that mean? And a concrete way to realise trust is, for example, if you see somebody who's done a similar, I refer to an anecdote where we created a portal for teachers using resources on the web several years ago. And the interesting thing we found was that teachers liked resources that were made by other teachers or were being used by other teachers. And they actually disliked the more polished resources that seemed to reflect to them software companies and publishers. So what made them trust the resources was the fact that people like them were using them. And another key point that we thought about is about being explicit about the role of open educational resources. The really interesting point that I think is non-trivial that we came to is that, in fact, open educational resources in many respects are really a marketing device. They're humanitarian initiatives. So if you take the MIT Open sort of initiative, it's really there. It's marketing for MIT. Now, of course, that's not a problem. But we need to be aware that sort of that a lot of the role of the open education resources isn't just about open education. It's often linked to the more business end of the people who actually produce them. Does anybody else want to? Someone?
Can I just follow on from that? I think we felt that the reality currently was that sometimes OERs are used for showcasing that the sort of developmental aspect of it, the potential to share your practice and learn from other people's practice, was a real huge behaviour shift, and that was potentially where the benefits could come. I mean, we had a very interesting discussion about what we thought open educational practices were, and including sort of really whether we were entering a sort of new environment of competition between institutions that was going to actually run counter to open educational practices. And we were also preparing practice in institutions, for instance, in the Open University and course teams. There is an explosion of practices, a certain level of openness already happening there. It was an incredibly wide range. You see, we wrote down 3 things from your question. We distilled what we could cope with from your question, and we didn't even get to the third. So we worked very hard.
Well, maybe a controversial question, which is out of that we even floated the idea, is there such a thing as an open educational practice? Because there's always really some institutional sort of incentive behind development of resources, e.g. for marketing, and also as if you use resources, open educational resources within traditional courses, is that really an open educational practice? So we came back towards where we were at the beginning of this workshop, like, do we need some definitional clarity about what we're talking about with open educational practices so that we know we're actually talking about the same thing?